been thinking a lot about the idea that I've been separating myself a lot from people that if I haven't, I think I've been talking to people about this actually, that I haven't known in a way that has any meaning to me, but just the very fact that I've been separating myself for some time makes it so that it almost feels like the very idea of coming back around and doing that kind of behavior again seems like impossible. And so I sort of am perpetually kind of with every single thing that happens, like undergoing a process by which like I just don't, every single behavior feels like an effort, and it doesn't seem possible to undergo that series of events again with anything. And so when that happens, how do you break down the process by which you create a naturalistic interaction with a person over a period of time for so long ever again? And especially when like you didn't really realize that it was an effort at first. And for example, like how do you engage with a person who in any kind of small way or big way expects you to behave a certain kind of way, and if you do it, it's a sacrifice, and if you don't, it doesn't work. And it goes on over and over again with everything. And so the only thing that one can do, kind of, is just kind of like place oneself in like a position that is like arbitrary. It doesn't actually represent like in any meaningful way like what it is you're trying to find. Sometimes it's like the thing that you found works in the past. And if that does happen, then you kind of get stuck in a rut, because everything becomes like an exchange of sort of effective strategies that then webs its way outward, where you have other people who hear about you doing this kind of thing and behaving this kind of way, even if in like the most like kind of like minor ways. Like it becomes like sort of like a death mask of like who you are as a person, and there's nothing you can do about it as far as I can tell, especially if you spend so much time thinking about it. And if that is like what you end up with, do you continue to make an effort to seem coherent, or do you like renegotiate yourself into a different position? And how do you do it? And you can use like a modeling strategy that comes from just like seeing other people, but it kind of puts you in the situation that you were in before, where no matter what, you don't get the kind of feedback that other people get, because you don't it isn't happening in an ordinary way. Instead, it becomes like a matter of like rehearsing and like failing so deeply, like failing repeatedly over and over again at like something that like other people find to be so easy. Like and I don't know, it becomes like so seductive to just like be like, and I don't mean that in a kind of like, like be present kind of way, because I'm being present all the time, like too present maybe, like and so like it sort of reflects itself in this in the manner in which you start looking at things and being like, oh yeah, that's great, because it exists. And the more that you focus on the architectural strategies of like different things that just exist, Like you kind of get buried in deeper and deeper and deeper into this hole where you just never can stop seeing seeing things for their aesthetic qualities that are, again, like arbitrary. But is it better to pursue things? I think that like a lot of the time effective strategies will be pursued in an arbitrary way, but because it's something that sounds good and it's something that sounds virtuous to do, when in actuality it turns out sometime later that it wasn't a virtuous strategy and it wasn't like effective, and it seemed to be, because of the advertisement that was made in relation to it, it seemed to be the correct choice because it sounded good, but it sounded good based on information that had the pallor of things that have happened before. And if you can't negotiate or file away those kinds of pieces of information, and instead you're stuck being a person without qualities, like how does a person who looks at you look at a person who seemingly has no qualities outside of the ability to describe that, because it isn't exactly anxiety per se. It's and it's not a problem. Also, like in theory, it kind of, in some respects, makes you like a more effective sort of a more effective operator. And I think that a lot of people view it as like a super strategy, wherein you can kind of affect different modes depending on where you are. And when in actuality, like, I think it's something that everybody thinks and feels. It's just a lot easier when you're not really thinking about it. And I guess, like, what is there to do? It's not bad per se, and like at points it feels much more pointed than at other times. But the problem is that it doesn't actually have any authentic relief, because regardless of what happens, it becomes like a thing where you it's kind of like, to use this example, it's kind of like the difference between building muscle and like engaging in aerobic exercise. Like, you kind of have the operation where you're doing something very quickly and very like ably, and you're kind of burning calories as you go, or you have the idea of developing a kind of routinization of behavior that allows you to draw on that strategy in a way that's like much more conditioned into you. But I always I become like so aware of the fact that there's very little that one can access, even if the things that are accessed by being a sort of like shallow temporary person over a long period of time in different environments is, even if those gains are very poor in quality, I think it can be very satisfying to reorient oneself to something else all the time, and not to hide oneself, because I think that I to some extent am like naturally a person without qualities in some respects, but like it can be very seductive to to renegotiate one's sort of circumstance into a place where other people are very used to having people come in and out of their life and have people sort of like approach them in a way that's like very like immediate, instead of like a kind of conditioned understanding. Because I think in my life, the longer that people know me, the longer that they tend to not want to be around me, which is very, it's good in some respects, because it forces me to kind of go back into the kind of conditioning mode that I'm most comfortable with, and to some extent it's probably a circumstance that I create for myself, but it can also be sort of it can be a handicap for, in like a kind of, again, like a kind of stylized way where you kind of imagine that there would be a way that you could have enduring, long-lasting relationships with people that would not involve kind of like very like temporary sweep up and then kind of like an expulsion. I think it's more of like, it's more interesting to me in like an aesthetic way than anything else. But I think I don't know. It's like a sort of, as soon as the input stops happening, it's sort of the output ceases too. And I'm sure that that's the way that others feel about me as well, which is probably, again, like it's probably for the best. And that's the way that I often end these things, I think, is that like the failure is for the best.